Welcome back to Newsmakers. I'm Tim White. To my right, WPRI.com reporter Ted Nesi, and from Rhode Island Public Radio, Ian Donis. Our guest for the second half is Republican candidate for Senate, Barry Hinckley. Barry, I think it's, first of all, welcome to the program.
Good to be here.
I think it's safe to say that people know very little about you. So why don't you give us a brief background on yourself?
Well, they know more and more. Every month our visibility goes up. But background, I moved to Rhode Island after college in 1991. I grew up in the marine industry, which of course Newport is oft considered the epicenter of the marine industry here in the Northeast. I moved here to work for the family business. I'd been a yacht captain working on our family boats for a couple years, and I moved on shore, so to speak, in Newport in 1991 and entered the family business then.
According to the Newport Board of Canvassers, you registered in Newport in June 2010, and you were unaffiliated. You were an independent. You voted in the Republican primary in 2010, then you went back, filled out a form to remain unaffiliated, then registered to become a Republican just February of this year. Why should fellow conservatives have any faith in you as a Republican when your voting records show that you just became one in February?
I left the Republican Party. To finish my story, I actually ended up moving to Massachusetts for a job when the boat business, the marine industry, cratered during the luxury tax in the early 90s. There was no more work. I, like many Rhode Island kids, had to leave to get work, and I ended up in Massachusetts. I was a Republican there, and I became unaffiliated because I was disgusted with what I would call fiscal irresponsibility of the second Bush administration, and I no longer felt I was comfortable in that party because of the massive size the government was becoming under his leadership. So I became unaffiliated. So when I moved down to Rhode Island, I remained, or moved back to Rhode Island, I remained unaffiliated. However, what I see today in the Republican Party, and the reason that I'm excited about running as a Republican, is I see a party that is willing and open to external criticism of themselves. And what I mean by that is Republicans are willing to have an open dialogue about their shortcomings in public. And that is constructive, I think, and that is healthy. We have a party that is willing to say, you know what, we've done things wrong in the past, there are better ways forward, and I like to be part of that open dialogue, and that's why I'm comfortable being a Republican today.
Just to wrap that up, I want to be clear on something. You said you moved to Massachusetts, but you are actually registered in Florida, correct?
I actually, when I moved back to Rhode Island at the end of '09, permanently, I actually relocated here in '06. On a temporary basis. My son was born at the Newport Hospital in 2006, and I commuted, but I remained a Mass resident because that's where I stayed during the week. I still have a house there. When I moved back in '09, I didn't plan to become a candidate for U.S. Senate. I planned to get another job when I left my software company. Unfortunately, the market here in Rhode Island is not good for getting jobs. It's horrible. I had been working on a part-time basis in the health food industry, the raw whole food industry. I spent a lot of time around health and nutrition in that sort of transition year out of software and looking for the next job. And I was working for a company at that time based in Florida. And I thought I was going to be working for them full-time and be relocating to Florida. And I actually began the process of relocating to Florida. I realized during that I really would rather stay in Rhode Island, and I decided that instead of finding another private sector job, the best way forward for me and my family was to fight for Rhode Island and a better future for my kids here. So I actually didn't end up moving to Florida like many people do for work. I ended up staying.
They say money is the mother's milk of politics, and you are at a severe disadvantage to Senator Whitehouse. Let me show you a picture of the comparison. Senator Whitehouse, you can see there on the left, has $2.6 million on hand as of September 30th. Your campaign had just under $150,000. How do you overcome that kind of enormous advantage that the incumbent has?
Well, to me, it boils down to what you're selling, what kind of product you have. We have a great product. We have a jobs product. I'm a job creator. I've created hundreds of jobs in the private sector. Rhode Island needs jobs. I've been out campaigning for 8 months now, selling my message of job creation. People love that message. Now we do have to fund that message. It's a marketing deal like any other product you're selling. You need to market the product. You do need money to market the product. But as my campaign gathers momentum, we are raising more and more money, and we will have the money, I am confident, to market this message. We won't need to spend as much money as he can gather, because he's an incumbent. And incumbents do what incumbents do. They basically raise a lot of money in exchange for favors. A lot of those favors end up in the tax code or earmarks or the other things that they've done to keep their jobs. It's easier for him to raise money, but I will contend that we have a much better message, and we won't need as much money as him because we're selling a better product.
Barry, you mentioned the Republican Party of today, so I'd like to ask you about that. We see how Republicans in Washington are obstinately opposed to any tax increases as part of efforts to cut the deficit. Even Republicans such as former Senator Alan Simpson of Wyoming have taken the GOP to task for that. So is the Republican Party in Washington the party of obstruction? Is it being held hostage by Grover Norquist?
Certainly, there's too much status quo in Washington, D.C. And what you're talking about, Ian, I would agree with. And I would agree with the fact that, from this point of view, our tax code is desperately broken. It's 80,000 pages. So, in my opinion, any effort to continue to tweak something that's broken is a fool's errand to begin with. So trying to raise more money through a busted tax code, I think, is the wrong way to go. I believe, like Marco Rubio says, we don't need more taxes, we need more taxpayers.
Yet mainstream news organizations like USA Today have reported that Americans, the tax rate they're paying is the lowest since 1950. Certainly the IRS does not have many fans, but what do you say to that, that this argument that Americans are being overtaxed is simply not true?
50% of Americans that file tax returns pay nothing, so you're right.
Well, wait a minute. Don't they pay something in local property taxes?
Payroll taxes?
But Ian was talking about the federal tax code.
I know, but if you're going to say that they pay nothing, I mean, that's sort of a line that's often used.
Pay nothing in federal tax, right?
Federal income tax.
Income tax, yeah.
Because
exactly.
payroll tax for Social Security, Medicare,
payroll tax
everyone
is interesting because think about it. The payroll tax technically is something that you get a benefit for down the road, right? So it feels like a tax.
But don't you get a benefit for any tax you pay? In theory, you get a defense.
But it's more of a defined benefit, right? Social Security is a defined benefit. Technically, you're going to get something in the future for that tax back. You used to get a report. They stopped sending it out, but you used to get a report saying this is what you can expect. Same with Medicare. You can expect to get health care benefits down the road. So technically, you're getting a benefit for that. Now, you've raised a really good question, whether those programs will be alive and well. For instance, I'm 45. When I retire, you know, let's say I retire when I'm 70, which won't happen, but let's say I do. That's 25 years from today. That's the year 2036. That's also the year that the trustees of Social Security say that that program becomes insolvent. So you have a program that I've paid taxes into, to use your terminology, for 49 years, essentially, you know, 12% of my income if you take what my employer contributes and what I've contributed, and I may get nothing. So yeah, it sort of feels like a tax. So
what do you suggest, let's take payroll taxes, that's the big debate in Washington right at this moment.
Right.
This question of whether to continue the reduction in the payroll tax cut and how to pay for it. Should we continue it and how should we pay for that?
Well, once again, I believe it's tinkering around the edges. So as an employer, I would never hire someone based on a payroll tax holiday. I would hire someone based on demand for my products and whether my company was growing and I needed more people to deliver those services and goods. That's why people hire people. They don't. This is a gimmick. It's a short-term gimmick that's going to go away.
But it's a gimmick that's put money in people's pockets. In fairness, I mean, taxes would go up January 1st without an extension.
And what it's also doing is it's starving the programs that are already in trouble. Think about it. Like, so they're tinkering around the edges. Social Security went into the red last year for the first time, ahead of schedule, in part because we're starving it the payroll taxes it needs to be funded.
Well, let's stay on
so we're creating problems, by trying to solve problems.
I'm interested in the tax conversation here. You have a national debt counter. I went to your website.
Yeah.
National debt counter, it's up more than $15 trillion, as we all know now. But, you know, I mean, didn't your Republican colleagues have a lot to do with that debt? And keeping it on the tax conversation, the Bush tax cuts, what do you say to the call that some of the so-called one-percenters, most famously Warren Buffett, have called for legislative change that would reach deeper into their pockets? Should millionaires and billionaires, like even Republican Senator Collins from Maine have called for, pay more in taxes to close that debt that you have ticking up on your own website?
I totally agree, to close that debt. And that's the argument.
Raise the taxes on the rich to close the debt?
Think about what they're talking about, because they're not talking about doing that. They're talking about raising taxes to create jobs. So the debate really is saying we want to raise taxes on the rich, right, and pump 5.6%, and pump that money through the government to somehow magically create jobs. There's not been any conversation about raising that money to pay down the debt. I've talked to many rich people, and many of them are very comfortable with the idea of paying more if they knew that that money they were paying went to pay down the debt on behalf of our children. But it's not. They want to raise more money, pump it through the federal government to somehow create jobs. That won't work.
That's interesting, though. That's a more subtle argument than what we seem to be hearing a lot in Washington, which is just a flat-out no on new additional tax revenue. Some have said, Senator Coburn has suggested perhaps you can close some of these gaps and stuff, but it sounds like what you're saying is as long as it doesn't go toward paying for new spending or continuing current spending, you'd be okay with higher taxes.
I have talked to many people, but once again, I want to go back to the fact that tinkering around a busted 80,000-page tax code that General Electric pays nothing because they have an army of lawyers and filed a 57,000-page tax return. Think about it. 57,000 pages they filed. Millions of dollars spent to file it. We'll spend millions as a government to review it, and no money changes hands. That's a broken tax code. The small business guy that can't afford the fancy lawyers gets hammered. That is an indication we have a busted tax code. So I don't like the idea of raising taxes through a broken mechanism, which is our tax code. I like the idea of a fair, simpler tax code that spreads out the base a little bit, allows small businesses to compete more, and hire more people. And then if we could define how the new money is getting spent to pay down our debt for our children, which is our responsibility, and get away from the notion that the government creates jobs. Raising taxes to create jobs via the government will never work.
If Congress can't reach an agreement to reduce the deficit, there will ultimately be automatic cuts in the military. So do we really need 2 Virginia-class submarines to be built a year by electric?
30 seconds, Barry, left in the program.
I'm a big fan of mobile military assets, which favor Rhode Island. We have too many bases abroad. We can no longer afford to be the world's police force. I think that we need to close down foreign bases and invest in more mobile assets. And new submarines are mobile assets. They will help Rhode Island, and they will help us be a stronger, smarter military.
Holiday tree or Christmas tree?
Christmas tree.
All right. Barry Hinckley, Republican candidate for Senate, our guest for the second half of Newsmakers. We appreciate you joining us on the program. If you missed any of it, including our first guest, Tenny Gross from the Institute for the Study and Practice of Nonviolence, catch it on our website, WPRI.com. It's under the on-air section. For Ian Donis, Ted Nisi, I'm Tim White. We'll see you next week on Newsmakers. Good job.